In this video we'll consider reflective writing, what it is and why it's important. It's the action or process of thinking carefully or deeply about a particular subject, particularly involving influence from one's past life and experiences. So it's the act of thinking, reflecting back on what we've, let's say, what we've written or what we think, and we're reflecting through the lens of our past experiences. We're looking at the situation from our past experiences and from our life, and we're trying to interpret and understand a particular situation in the context of our past experiences. That particular definition, the one we've got on the screen, comes from the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, reflection plays a key role in self-development and deeper learning through past experiences. Essentially, we interpret new situations through the context of what we have already experienced. So we always try to understand what's happening around us, or what the new situations that we confront. We're trying to understand those in the context of our past experiences. Sometimes the situations we confront are entirely new, and therefore we're in a new learning situation. But sometimes we have an indication of the significance, the importance, and the processes that are required in a particular situation. And we have that knowledge or that experience because of our past, because of what we've been through. Reflection is a vital part of academic studies. This module requires you to take on a reflective practice activity, for example. But you could say that all modules do that. All modules ask you to interpret material, and the very act of interpreting the material means you're drawing on not just what you're learning currently, but what you have learned in the past and what your past experiences are. But there are modules, like the current module, where you are specifically asked to draw on your past experiences. This whole idea is to emphasize the importance of the lifelong learning nature of our learning. We're lifelong learning because we are adding to our experiences day by day, and we are also drawing on our cumulative experiences on a day-to-day basis. You're required to discuss your learning and experiences of your research journey. Now, in academic terms, that's what we do. We produce research papers, we produce reflective papers, and we interpret what we have learned or what's confronting us, let's say academically. We interpret that based on the actual material that we're studying currently, plus what we have learned in the past. So on our journey, our academic journey, we have learned lots of tools and techniques. We have learned lots of facts and figures, and we understand relationships and models. And we use these to make sense of a current situation. So we are reflecting. It's even better if we get around to writing all of this down. We write down the current problem, we write down possible solutions, and then we reflect on which ones are most appropriate. The exercise of writing it down makes it very clear the way our thinking has developed and on what we are currently involved in and what we think currently. So we are constantly drawing, that's the point, on our past experiences. Reflection plays a key role in self-development and deeper learning through past experiences. A lot of our learning is self-learning. We don't necessarily have to go to school or college to learn. We learn from our experiences. We learn from our daily experiences. We understand a lot of what happens in the physical world in terms of the weather, the relationships we see around us in terms of construction sites and factories and people going to work, and we understand a lot from just observations. And this means we're able to abstract from what we have learnt in the past, and it makes us more aware of our environment, of our setting, and we're able to use this then to analyze current situations. So we're constantly in the process of learning. A lot of it is passive. We're not going out looking to learn. It just so happens we learn by observation, by listening, by talking, by interacting, and we have built up an accumulation of ideas and facts and figures and relationships in our heads that we draw on when we are asked to make sense of a particular situation. Reflection is a vital part of academic studies. This module requires you to take on a reflective practice activity, as I said earlier, and it's important to understand that in the academic world it is very progressive. It is step by step. We learn to count and to add before we learn to multiply. So it's constantly adding to our stock of knowledge. Whatever we know, we add to it. And that means that the subsequent studies further down the line are much more sophisticated because we have a bigger pool of knowledge from which to draw. So you'll be asked to look at your learning experience on your research journey. You'll be asked to reflect, and many academic courses ask students to undertake a particular activity and then to produce a paper, a short paper, about what they felt about this activity and how they went about it and how they structured it, so the tutors can have an understanding of your thought process, how you attempted this particular activity and where you were very efficient and perhaps where you missed points. But it's also, the reflective activity it's also important because it shows any gaps in your knowledge or experience that needs to be filled in. Perhaps somewhere along the line you missed out some experiences, or you missed out on some learning, and it shows up further along. So reflective writing enables you to put your reflection into a written structured format and to link it to academic theory. So we are constantly adding to our stock of knowledge. We are constantly becoming more sophisticated in our thinking, and so when we add a new theory or a new way of thinking about a situation, when we add that into the mix, we are much more sophisticated in our appraisal of that particular technique. That does not mean if we reject the technique that we throw it out. We keep it because it is also a part of our learning experiences. So we're very much collectors of techniques. We do it on a daily basis. We do it passively sometimes. We don't set out to have the experiences. We just get the experiences. We observe. We learn from various sources. We learn from talking to people. We learn from reading the newspaper. We learn from a whole variety of sources. And this is what makes us much more cognitive and much more interesting analytically and academically over time. Reflective writing is more personal than academic writing. The process requires a more deeper, or if you like, a deeper and personal approach. So reflective writing is more personal. It's how we have approached a particular problem and how we solved it. Academic writing tends to be impersonal. For a start, we tend to write academic writing in the third person. In other words, we say a certain situation was undertaken. We didn't say we undertook it, we say it was undertaken. Whereas if we're writing in a personal context, we would say a certain situation arose and I undertook. I undertook. It's personal. It's the first person in grammar. So academic tends to be third person. It tends to be, we don't mention the person. We say it was. It was undertaken. This project was undertaken so as to investigate a certain situation. We don't say I undertook this project to investigate. So pure academic writing tends to be quite impersonal, whereas reflective writing is much more based about us. How did we as individuals attempt to bring about a solution to a particular problem, and what resources did we draw on? Our experiences, our past histories, our past learning. What do we draw on exactly to solve this problem? And we write it up in a much more personalized way. So there is a difference between reflective writing, much more personal, than academic writing, much more objective. Now, reflective writing involves thinking about an event, situation, or a project. So we start from that point. We're reflecting. We think about an event. We think about something we want to reflect on. We want to reflect on a particular event that happened, or we want to reflect on something we read so we can try to understand it more fully. Then we make an analysis, an in-depth analysis of different perspectives. We use theories and models to do this. So we use academic material to help us in reflection. We try to make sense of what we have experienced. As I said, it might be something we read. Something we read in a newspaper, and we want to know why. Why does it work that way? Now we're reflecting on it. We're trying to understand it. And to understand it, we might draw on theories that we've encountered when we studied, or on some information that we drew on the past. It's based in the past, and we draw on that. So we make an analysis. The analysis should be quite objective as well. It's not prejudiced in any way. It's not us bullying our opinions. We are trying to logically and dispassionately find out how a particular situation is dealt with. So we're thinking about the event or project and its influence on learning, progress, and professional development. We're thinking about some issue, and we want to make sense of it. And in so doing, it'll add to our knowledge, it'll add to our learning. It'll also help us progress. We'll move to the next level because now we have a bigger stock of knowledge, we have more experience, and of course that will help us professionally as well. Get a better job, better prospects in our career. Now, the benefits of reflective writing, well, if it's done properly, they can help us prevent mistakes, because we might have encountered the situation before, and now we're thinking of this situation is similar to something we met in the past. This is what we did in the past, therefore we need to do the same now. So we're not finding situations new all the time. We have a stock of experience, and one of those experiences may coincide with what we are currently facing, and we can draw on that experience to help us. So the more experiences we've got, the better our decision making. It helps us prevent mistakes. It also encourages deeper learning, because we understand that the body of knowledge is quite vast, and each experience is adding to our knowledge, to our stock of knowledge, So the more experiences we have, the more knowledge we get, and this will encourage us to go deeper. We can now go deeper because we have more experiences, we have more knowledge, so we're able to become more sophisticated in our thinking and in our analysis. We can use all of this to evaluate progress on the project we're working on. We can look at what we're attempting to do, we can look at where we've got to, we can see what's holding us up and why is it holding us up, and what can we draw on to try and fix any hold up so we can move on. We become much more cognitive, much more analytical, much more rational. We are thinking about the situation and we are trying to resolve issues so we can make progress. It also develops the personal and the professional performance to inform future practice. As people, we become much more reflective, we become much more thoughtful, we become much more detailed in the way we approach situations. We know how to construct logical thinking because we've done it in the past. We've made mistakes in the past and we've learned from the mistakes. We know how to avoid the mistakes, as I said earlier. So we become much more efficient, much more cognitive, much more rational in the thinking, the true sense of the word rational. We become thinking people. We look at the situation, we think about the solutions, we think about our experiences, and if we don't have an experience that coincides with the current situation, we know that we have to look and search and find. And once we've done that and we've resolved the current issue, our stock of knowledge has been augmented. It's been further developed. So we have an even greater stock in the future. So we have a better professional performance as a consequence. We apply theories to analyze learning. We do this in academic circles all the time. We see a model or we see some sort of postulated relationship between variables and we question it immediately. We're trained to question. We're trained to criticize. Criticism is good, providing it's not, of course, empty personal criticism and abuse. Academic criticism is very special. It means we are trying to refine the thought process. We're trying to improve the thought process. We're trying to look at models and say, well, what if that assumption was not made? What if we analyzed it this way as opposed to that way? And what if we changed something around? We're looking all the time to look for improvements. So it may sound strange, but we are looking for criticism. Criticism is what helps us to improve. If we show our work to a colleague and he or she criticizes the work properly, in other words, finds errors in the work, then that person has helped us to improve the work. And the next time round we face a similar situation, perhaps we don't have to draw on that person for that criticism. We might still want to consult the person because he or she might find new criticisms, new issues that we need to consider. And once we've done that, we have a better piece of work because it's been criticized. So criticism is something we should welcome, something we should look for, because it helps us. It's constructive. There is, of course, destructive criticism where people just abuse each other and call names and insult each other. That's not the sort of criticism we're talking about. We're talking about academic criticism to improve an argument, to improve a piece of work. A lifelong skill which can contribute towards professional and personal development. Well, it is a lifelong skill because every day we get up, we find new experiences. The world is moving on. We have new technologies. We have new ways of speaking to each other, electronically, face to face. We have new routines, new working practices. We have new ways of transport. We're facing modernity, and modernity, the modern world, is increasingly sophisticated. So every day we're acquiring new skills. Well, this means we are able to cope in the world. This means that we are better equipped to deal with the world as it evolves. Now, the types of reflective writing, well, assessed piece of work for academic assignments or projects, that's the usual way in which we encounter the need for reflective writing. In fact, it can apply to anything. It can apply to a piece of work for your work situation where you're working in an office and you're asked to produce a report. It is best to write the report, leave it for a little while, return and read it with fresh eyes, or ask a colleague to read it as well and criticize it, and try to polish the work before it's submitted. Don't rush it, just think about it. And in academic work, this is very important, that when we think of an essay or a project, a research project perhaps, it's important to have a structure, write it down, think about it, leave it, come back to it, improve it, look for criticisms, and generally let it emerge. And even when it's finished, when you have completed it, again, leave it for a day or as long as you can, and return and read it again with fresh eyes, and ask a colleague again if he or she has got the time to read over it again and criticize, because we always find errors, we find issues that could be better explained. And this is the whole idea of reflective writing. It's looking back on our experiences, looking back on our body of knowledge, looking back on the way we process information and deal with information, the way we analyze. Look back on all of that, produce it in a piece of work, and then polish it. We also have personal reflective writing. For example, maintaining a journal or a journey log or a diary. And even in these ways we can benefit, because we write down our ideas about something. It may be just a couple of sentences, but when we revisit it at a later date, we can reflect on it and think about it and think, was our interpretation accurate, or was it fair what we thought or said? So we can again polish. Now, the key elements in reflective writing, well, your writing structure should emphasize on your analysis and exploration of the experience. So we should be able to look at our experiences and explore our experiences. And this should form the core of what we're writing about. This is our interpretation of the event we're discussing. And then write it down as clearly as possible, because this description is what we will return to at a later date to reflect on and discuss. Generally, reflective writing is written in the first person, I, to describe your experiences, feelings and opinions. I mentioned this earlier, but generally speaking, reflective writing is much more personalized. It's what you consider to be important from your past experiences, and you are reflecting on your past experiences, so it's a much more personalized writing style. Academic style, as I said earlier, tends to be very impersonal, usually written in the third person, in the infinite mood. So you write about it was done as opposed to I did it. So this is much more personalized. Writing in the third person when referring to theorists. For example, when we talk about Smith 2017 implies, That's writing in the third person. So you're talking about Smith. You don't say I. Obviously, it's not you. It's somebody else. So the key elements in reflective writing. Well, use formal language, even though it's personal reflection, and try to support your arguments with evidence. So use proper language. Don't use slang terms or expressions which are very time bound, in other words, which are fashionable at the moment. Make sure it's much more formal in that sense, so it can be interpreted over time. And make sure that any points you make about your past experiences, you can justify those points. They're not just comments that you are inventing at the time. These are supported points. So we call them arguments. Arguments are points. So supported points with evidence. Supported arguments with evidence. An argument is a particular statement or perspective. And you're producing evidence as to why you believe something to be the way it is. So you look back in past experience. Now you're explaining the past experience, and you're doing that with evidence. You're saying why this happened and why you feel the way you do about the past experience. Don't just say, I do feel this. You say, I feel this because, and give a reason for it. Write about your feelings, weaknesses, strengths, anxieties, mistakes, and successes. It's a personal, reflective document. And these emotions may have run through your head. You may have felt anxiety. You may have been worried about a certain situation, but then you felt that once you started to do it, it was manageable, or you had perspectives that you didn't even think you had at the start. Look at the weaknesses that you considered that were inherent in the original project, and look at how these could be addressed. Look at the mistakes you made when you first wrote something, and go back and correct the mistakes. It can be anything from grammar, spelling, syntax, the precise words that you used, the construction, the way you used it, the lack of paragraphs or the lack of layout, the points you made and how the points were not supported or connected. These are all mistakes. These are all issues that need to be addressed, so that the second piece of work, the reflective piece of work, shows how to fix these and how to avoid them in the future. Reflection should be linked to academic theories and provide a strong foundation to your research journey. As far as possible, we don't just criticize for the sake of it. We don't just criticize because we feel it's the right thing to do. We criticize because we're using an alternative perspective, a model, some theorist, some writer who has come up with a new way of looking at a certain situation, and we might use that writer's ideas to interpret our own work. And we might use that writer's ideas to criticize our own work. But in so doing, we have to, first of all, mention who the writer is, what the techniques are, what the weaknesses of those techniques and the criticisms of those techniques, and then say, despite all of that, this is the insight that the writer's material gives us on our own work. So we have a much better understanding of what we wrote. We have a much better perspective. We have polished our own work using the ideas of someone else. So someone else comes up with a model, a certain way of doing it. We might be able to apply that in our context, which will improve our work. That's the point. And of course, it's necessary to reference all information sources. It's absolutely essential that if we write down that we're using a particular set of ideas put forward by somebody, we reference that completely. So we know the source and we can go back and find it easily if we need to. We're also, of course, crediting that writer with those ideas. So we're not plagiarizing the ideas. We're not stealing somebody's ideas. So it's important to reference even sources of data, reference other people's work if we're using other people's work in our original presentation. So always in our reflective work, always use sources and give the precise reference for the sources. Now, structure reflective writing. Well, first of all, the description. Explain what happened, the purpose of the reflection, and describe the key activities which will be discussed. So when you're setting out a reflective document, just explain at the start what it is you're going to deal with, why you're reflecting on it, and describe what you will deal with in the reflective document. In other words, that will be your introduction. And you are describing the reflective work in a paragraph, let's say, which is really your introduction. And then we have the interpretation and analysis. How did I feel about the overall project outcomes? Itemize the outcomes for a start, state the outcomes, and then write about how you felt about these. Were the strong outcomes, were the weak? Were you worried about the outcomes? Did you think the outcomes were properly supported by the evidence? Do you think that the outcomes were based on the models that you had studied? Did you feel that the outcomes were perhaps not adequately supported and therefore should not be emphasized? So it's important to look at the outcomes and interpret or analyze the outcomes to see if they are robust, if they are worth keeping. And how would you develop the work? Perhaps when you originally wrote it, you just wrote it and left it. But maybe there were opportunities to develop it. Sometimes there are opportunities, but because of word limit restrictions, perhaps a tutor said you must stay within a certain word limit, you decided not to develop it. But perhaps you could have indicated that the work could have been developed in another direction. Just a sentence, just indicating that you were aware that the work could be developed and other insights gained. And that would be a welcomed addition. And why did I respond in the way I did? Why did I analyze the situation? Why did I look at the evidence in the original document? Why did I do all of that and then come to the conclusions I did? Perhaps alternative conclusions were warranted. Perhaps you should have looked at alternatives as opposed to just looking at the few that you did. Could it have been a richer set of outcomes from your investigations? And what are the most important or relevant aspects? How does it link to theory? What went well and what didn't? In other words, always try to use a theory to explain the data. Otherwise we tend to be very descriptive. We're just descriptive, we're describing, we're not analyzing, we're not talking about what the data or what the facts are telling us. What we need to know is, why are the facts the way they are? What's the data really telling us? If we say that the average income in a certain group has increased by 5% in the last year, that's okay, but isn't it more interesting to say why it's increased by 5%? What caused it? What model can we use to explain this? And what are the criticisms of that model? So we are becoming more analytical. We're explaining, we're attempting to explain why the situation occurred. And this is very similar to what we see on news programs on television nowadays. We see reporters reporting the facts, but they're also trying to interpret the facts, explain why the facts are the way they are. So more and more journalism is attempting to insert analysis as well as the facts. Now the structure of reflective writing. Well, as I said, outcome evaluation, what I have learnt. This would be the outcome. What did I learn from the whole experience? First of all, I think we would have learnt that engaging in the reflective process has helped us immensely in our learning related to the particular topic under consideration, because we are now looking at it from different perspectives, and we are much more analytical and much more cognitive about our approach to that particular topic. What would I change? Well, you'd have to look at the original piece of work, look at its shortcomings in the from the context of the reflective piece of work, the second piece of work we're talking about here, based on the first. What was the weaknesses of the first one? Where did it fall short? At the time you wrote it, you honestly believed that there were no shortcomings. You were happy with it, perhaps. But now, on reflection, you can start to see that there are areas that could have been developed, some areas that were developed that were not really necessary, some outcomes were not supported by the evidence, some statements. So what would you change? And how would those changes have changed the original document? And how do I intend to make these changes, and by when? Is it the case that the original document has been submitted and now the opportunities have gone, or are there still opportunities to make the changes? And that's why it's useful to have reflection on a timely manner, in a timely manner. Write the original, and if you have the opportunity, leave it for a day or two, and then return, read it, think about it again, and try to add in any changes. For some reason that I readily can't explain at this moment because of time and pressure, but by and large, when we leave something for a couple of days and return to it, we will find opportunities to make changes. We will find opportunities to improve the work. I'm not simply talking about correcting spellings or changing the grammar or the pagination or looking at paragraphs or whatever. We're not simply talking about, we're talking about the content, the actual content of what has been said. We'll find opportunities, a lot of the time, we'll find those opportunities to make those changes, and that's to be welcomed. So try, when you write a piece of work, to give yourself enough time to return to it, to polish it before it's submitted. Look at particular theories. Look at Cobb and Gibbs, for example, and there are videos on those available on the course. But go back and have a look at those and see what they have to think about this whole idea of reflection and learning. Now, avoiding generalizations. Well, reflective writing should avoid generalizations and should focus on your personal development and this research journey. So when we're reflecting, we shouldn't try to generalize and say, well, this is what happens to everyone, because this is a much more personal account. This is what happened to you. So avoid generalizations. Focus in on what you learned from the experience and what you encountered in the experience. Try to avoid generalizing and saying everyone will feel this or everyone will have the same experience. They won't. Other people reflecting on their work will have different experiences, chances are. So it's worth remembering that the personalized account is based on your experiences. The work you're submitting will be written in a very academic form and hence very neutral and non-personal, but the reflective report will be your experiences of doing that work. And that, as I said, may throw up some new insights into the original. Be specific about the research outcome, and this should be evident in your conclusion. So make sure that when you've written the original that there is a good conclusion which absolutely clearly states what the outcome was. It has no doubt about what the outcomes are. Sometimes the outcomes are ambiguous in themselves, but clearly state that and state the reasons why they are ambiguous. But a lot of the time the outcomes will indicate some preferred course of action or some insight that the data or the analysis has given us. In that case, make sure it's stated clearly in the conclusion. And in the reflective paper, make sure that that is considered in detail and that the confidence that you have in the conclusion from the original paper is justified. Make sure when looking at the reflective paper that on reading the first one, the original document, make sure that any conclusions which are firmly stated are justified. Make sure the evidence is there, the models are there, and whatever criticisms that can be levied against the whole process are also clearly stated. So it's an exercise in complete honesty. Outcomes should be specific and actionable. In the reflective writing, any outcomes from the reflective writing, they should be specific and actionable. In other words, it should be that if the original document was to be done again, it would be modified in specific ways, and it can be modified in those specific ways. So the whole idea of reflective writing is to look at some activity from the past, think about the activity, write up what happened and what was undertaken, and then see if there are some improvements that can be made to that. And that's it in a nutshell. That's the nature of reflective writing. Now it's quite a long video, this one, and I've taken time to go into various bits and pieces. It's well worth to go back over the video, stop it from time to time, make your own notes, and think about the issues that we have talked about here. I'm reluctant to say what you should do is go back and look at the video again and reflect upon it, but I suppose really that's what I'm asking you to do. But that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and just mention the only source that I looked at there was the Oxford English Dictionary. But let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.